The first time Bryson saw the envelope, he didn't think much of it. White, ordinary, neat, the kind of letter you'd expect from a bank or maybe an insurance office. It was early evening in Georgetown, Texas. The crickets had just begun their song, and the cicadas' buzz was fading into the hum of sprinklers kicking on across perfectly manicured lawns. Bryson walked back from the road with the letter pinched between two calloused fingers, the last orange of sunset glinting off his truck parked in the gravel drive. Inside, he tore it open absent-mindedly. The words inside jolted him upright. Violation notice. Non-compliant shed. Fine $50. He blinked. His shed, the one he just built on his 3 acres, painted earth brown, simple lines, solid roof. A shed he'd built with his own hands, sweat soaking his shirt in the July sun. He laughed under his breath, shaking his head. Mistake, he thought. Has to be. 2 days later, another letter arrived. Then another. By the end of the month, his kitchen table looked like a poker game gone wrong. Envelopes spread like a losing hand, each one colder than the last. Violation notice. Non-standard exterior lighting. Fine $2,000. Final warning. Gravel driveway inconsistent with neighborhood standards. Escalation pending. Ongoing refusal to comply. Bryson sat there at night, the lamp casting hard shadows across his weathered face, jaw tight as he read line after line. He was a man who had built businesses, who had weathered recessions, who had come to Georgetown to escape the noise. Yet here he was, shackled by paper. A knock at the door broke the silence. McDevereaux stepped in, the kind of friend who didn't wait to be invited. Broad-shouldered, silver threading through his beard, he pulled a chair and grabbed one of the letters. "They can't do this," Mick muttered, eyes scanning. His voice carried the gravel of long nights and long roads. "Your property ain't even in their gates." "Tell that to them," Bryson muttered, tossing another notice onto the pile. "Every week it's something new. They act like they own me." Mick leaned back, exhaling through his nose. "This ain't compliance. This is harassment. They're counting on you folding." Bryson leaned forward, his eyes hard, the quiet fury of a man who'd been pushed too far. They picked the wrong man. The fines grew. $100 here, $1,000 there. Soon the numbers reached so high, Bryson stopped counting. He opened the latest letter one morning, standing barefoot in the kitchen with coffee still steaming in his mug. Total balance due, $257,000. He stared at the number, the steam from his coffee fogging the paper until it blurred. $250,000. For mailbox angles, for porch lights, for gravel on his own driveway. It wasn't real. Couldn't be. Yet the paper cut him all the same. By now, the neighborhood had turned. On his morning drives, Bryson noticed the way curtains shifted when his truck rumbled past, how conversations in the grocery store paused when he walked down the aisle. Neighbors who had once waved now stiffened, eyes sliding away. At first it was subtle, then it sharpened. At the feed store, 2 men whispered near the counter. He caught one word, delinquent. At the farmer's market, a woman in yoga pants and a wide hat stopped mid-conversation as Bryson walked past, her eyes narrowing like she was looking at a trespasser, not a neighbor. He told himself it didn't matter. But the truth was, the gossip stung worse than the fines. One night, his teenage nephew Tobias stopped by after helping with yard work. They sat at the table, a pile of letters between them like evidence from a crime. "They're charging you this much for a shed?" Tobias asked, his young face twisted in disbelief. Bryson laughed once, bitter. "For a shed, for a mailbox, for whatever they can think of." Tobias picked one up, his voice half amused, half shocked as he read. "Violation, non-standard exterior lighting. Fine $2,000. "This is crazy," Tobias muttered. "It's not crazy," Bryson said quietly. "It's control." His phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Mick lit the screen. "HOA spreading word you're delinquent. Watch your back." Bryson picked it up, staring out the window at the dark fields beyond his property line. His voice, when it came, was steady but sharp. You don't ignore bullies. You stand your ground. That ground would soon shift, because in the bottom of a filing cabinet, buried in paperwork he'd nearly forgotten, Bryson would uncover something the HOA never expected. A detail so small it had slipped their eyes. A detail that would turn every letter, every fine, every smug final notice into their own undoing. But for now, all Bryson had were letters, and the weight of a neighborhood waiting for him to break. The Georgetown Estates clubhouse was designed to impress. Vaulted ceilings, polished oak tables, neutral carpet that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. But on that muggy Tuesday evening, it felt more like a courtroom than a community center. Every folding chair was filled. Retirees in pressed khakis, mothers with strollers squeezed against the back wall. Men in polos sat with their arms crossed, waiting. Their whispers hummed low, punctuated by the occasional cough. And at the head of the long table, under the fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly, sat Gregory Haskell, the HOA president. He was tall, square-jawed, dressed like he was about to close a Wall Street deal rather than preside over lawn disputes. Beside him, Elaine Drummond, the vice president, shuffled papers with a severity that suggested she was preparing to prosecute a criminal. Bryson walked in quietly, a folder tucked under his arm. His boots struck the carpet with measured thuds, and every head turned. Conversations cut off. The air itself seemed to stiffen as he took a seat in the front row. A woman in the second row leaned toward her husband. "That's him," she whispered. The word "him" hung like a stain. Gregory cleared his throat into the microphone. His voice carried smooth, practiced authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin with new business. As you know, there have been ongoing compliance issues with one of our bordering properties." Every eye shifted toward Bryson. Gregory continued, his smile professional but sharp. "Mr. Keaton, you've received multiple notices regarding violations. I trust you've seen the letters." Bryson leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his folder resting against his thigh. His voice was calm, steady, carrying easily across the room. "I've seen them all. 24 of them." From the back, someone chuckled nervously. Elaine shot them a glare sharp enough to silence. Gregory adjusted his tie. "Then you know the severity. These aren't trivial matters. Uniformity protects property values. If one person refuses to comply, it affects everyone." Bryson tilted his head slightly, eyes narrowing. "Except my property isn't in your community." The room shifted. Murmurs spread like a ripple. Gregory's jaw tightened, though his smile didn't falter. "That's a common misunderstanding. While your parcel may be outside the gates, it is still subject to HOA oversight. Our bylaws extend to bordering lots for aesthetic consistency." Bryson let the silence sit for a beat. Then he reached into his folder and slid a paper across the table. A deed, crisp and official. His voice was quiet, but sharp enough to cut the hum of whispers. "No, it doesn't. I've read your bylaws, and I've read mine. Your reach ends at your fence line. Everything beyond that is my land, not yours." For a moment, the room froze. Elaine's eyes scanned the deed, her lips pressing into a thin, bloodless line. Gregory glanced at her, then back at Bryson. "Regardless," Gregory said finally, his voice slipping, "the fines stand. If you refuse to pay, the board has authority to escalate the matter legally. That's not a threat, it's procedure." Bryson leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his voice low but clear. "If you want to waste your time in court, be my guest. But let's be clear, I don't answer to this board. Not now. Not ever." Gasps broke from the crowd. Neighbors exchanged glances, some uneasy, some intrigued. From the middle row, Janice Rowland, a retired accountant, her hair pulled into a neat bun, raised her hand. Her voice was steady but skeptical. "Excuse me, Gregory, but if his property isn't officially under the HOA, how can you keep fining him? Won't that just blow back on us?" Elaine cut in quickly, her tone clipped. "Mrs. Rowland, the integrity of our community is at stake. We can't allow exceptions. If Mr. Keaton is permitted to disregard standards, it sets a dangerous precedent." Bryson turned, meeting Janice's eyes. His words carried an edge that made people sit straighter. They're not protecting integrity. They're protecting control. There's a difference. The line landed heavy. Even the people who didn't particularly like him found themselves chewing on it. Gregory tapped his pen against the table, faster than before. We'll be in touch with our legal team. Meeting adjourned. The gavel cracked, sharp as a pistol shot. Outside, the Texas night was still thick with heat. Bryson stepped into the parking lot, exhaling slowly. Mick leaned against Bryson's truck, arms folded, watching the neighbors trickle out in clusters. Some avoided Bryson's gaze. Others gave subtle nods, like silent approval they didn't dare voice indoors. How bad was it? Mick asked. Bryson unlocked his truck, smirking faintly. Bad enough. They're dead set on dragging me to court. Mick shook his head. You know they're gonna spin this. Paint you as the enemy. Bryson's smile faded. His voice was flat. Yeah, I know, but the truth doesn't scare me. He paused, glancing back at the glowing clubhouse windows, where Gregory and Elaine still lingered, huddled in low whispers. It scares them. The fines didn't stop. By July, they had ballooned past $250,000. $250,000. The numbers were absurd, but the impact was real. Bryson could feel the pressure, not in his bank account, but in his soul. At the grocery store, two women in the produce aisle fell silent as he walked past, pretending to examine apples. At the gas station, Caleb Morton, a contractor from inside the gates, squared his shoulders and said loud enough for others to hear, "You think you're above the rules, don't you?" Bryson screwed the cap back on his tank, turning slowly. His voice was calm, but his eyes were sharp. "No, Caleb. I just don't follow rules that don't apply to me." Caleb scoffed. "That's the kind of thinking that ruins neighborhoods. People like you make everything harder for the rest of us. Selfish." Bryson held his gaze, unblinking. Selfish is when a group tries to control land they don't own. Tell your board, if they want to fight, they'll get one. The words hung in the hot evening air as Caleb walked away, muttering under his breath. That night, Mick stopped by again, setting a six-pack of Shinerbach on the counter. He glanced at the mountain of envelopes on the table and whistled low. "Looks worse every time I come here." "They've hit $250,000 now," Bryson said, almost grinning. "It's so outrageous, it's funny." "Funny until they drag you into court." Bryson looked at him, eyes steady. "Let them. I'm ready." Mick studied him for a moment, then raised a brow. "You've got something up your sleeve, don't you?" Bryson hesitated, then shook his head. "Not yet, but when the time comes, they'll find out." The time came sooner than anyone expected. A final letter arrived. It didn't look different from the rest. Same letterhead, same clipped phrasing, same smug signature at the bottom. But when Bryson read it, he felt something click. It wasn't another fine. It was a lawsuit. If he didn't pay the $250,000 balance, the HOA would drag him into Williamson County Court. Bryson stared at the words, the paper trembling slightly between his fingers. Then he set it down and dialed Mick. "They're taking me to court," he said flatly. Mick's laugh barked down the line. "You're kidding. I wish I was." Bryson's voice was steady, almost too steady. "They think this is their big move, that they've finally got me cornered." Mick was silent for a beat. Then, "You're not paying a dime, though." "Right, not a dime," Bryson said. A slow smile crept across his face, though his eyes stayed cold. "They don't realize the ground they're standing on isn't even theirs." The Williamson County Courthouse rose like a fortress against the morning sky. Red brick, stone columns, and steps worn smooth by decades of boots and shoes. On that humid morning, the air buzzed with more than cicadas. Reporters lingered near the steps. Neighbors gathered in small, whispering clusters. Everyone wanted to see the fight. Inside, the air was cooler but heavier, as though the walls themselves leaned in to listen. The HOA sat at the plaintiff's table, rigid and composed. Gregory in a dark suit, his jaw tight. Elaine hunched over papers, her glasses perched low, scribbling like she was writing history itself. Their attorney, Clinton Avery, paced like a wolf rehearsing its attack. Bryson entered quietly with his lawyer, Renee Callahan. She was lean, sharp-eyed, and carried her files like a scalpel. No theatrics, no wasted words. She leaned toward him as they Saturday, "Stay calm. We've got this." Bryson nodded, jaw set. His eyes flicked toward Gregory. For a split second, Gregory smirked, a predator who thought the prey was already caged. The bailiff called the room to order. Judge Harold Branning, silver hair and a voice like gravel rolled smooth, settled behind the bench. His gaze swept the room before landing on the stack of files in front of him. "Case number 24 to 319, he intoned. "Georgetown Estates Homeowners Association versus Mr. Bryson Keaton. Plaintiff, you may begin." Clinton Avery stood, buttoning his jacket with deliberate precision. His voice was smooth, confident, rehearsed. "Your Honor, this case is straightforward. My clients represent a community built on rules, on uniformity, on standards that protect property values. Mr. Keaton has disregarded those standards repeatedly. He has been fined accordingly. More than $250,000 in violations. He refuses to comply, refuses to pay, and in doing so, threatens not just aesthetics, but fairness itself. We ask the court to enforce these fines and restore order." He sat down, satisfied. Gregory sat tall beside him, chin lifted. Elaine nodded briskly, as though each word had already been signed and sealed. Then Renee rose. She didn't stride. She didn't grandstand. She simply walked to the podium, set a single folder down, and lifted her gaze to the judge. "Your Honor, this case is not about fairness. It is about overreach." Her voice was calm, steady, cutting through the quiet like a blade. "For months, my client has received notices and fines from an organization that has no authority over him. Mr. Keaton's land is outside the subdivision. He is not, nor has he ever been, a member of this Homeowners Association. Yet they fined him, harassed him, and now seek to bleed him dry through legal intimidation." Murmurs stirred in the gallery. Neighbors shifted in their seats. The judge rapped his gavel once for silence. Renee opened a folder. The rustle of paper seemed louder than it should have. "And today, Your Honor, we will show that not only does the HOA lack jurisdiction, but in fact, they've been standing on my client's land all along." Gregory's head snapped up. Elaine froze mid-scribble. Clinton's confident mask faltered. Renee handed the judge a series of deeds, survey maps, and filings. Each one stamped, notarized, irrefutable. "Years ago," she continued, "Mr. Keaton acquired a holding company through a real estate venture. On paper, that company owns the ground beneath Georgetown Estates. The roads, the lawns, the million-dollar homes. All of it. The homeowners may hold their houses, but the soil, the very earth beneath them, traces back to my client." Gasps rippled through the room. Someone in the back whispered, "He owns the land?" Another voice, "That can't be right." The judge adjusted his glasses, scanning the documents with a furrowed brow. "Are you saying the defendant owns the land beneath the subdivision itself?" "Yes, Your Honor," Renee replied smoothly. "The HOA's reach ends at their fence. Beyond that, their so-called authority collapses." Clinton shot to his feet. "Objection. This is irrelevant to the matter of fines." Renee didn't blink. "On the contrary, the fines are the matter. If the HOA had no authority to levy them, then the entire case crumbles. And what authority can they claim when their own foundation, literally, rests on my client's deed?" The room buzzed louder. The judge banged his gavel, his voice firm. Quiet in the gallery. He leaned back, eyes narrowing at the papers in front of him. Silence stretched, the kind of silence that made hearts pound. Finally, he spoke. "This presents a serious challenge to the plaintiff's standing. I will recess to review these documents thoroughly before ruling." The gavel cracked. The room erupted. Neighbors whispered furiously. Some turned in their seats to stare at Bryson like he was a stranger. Gregory leaned toward Clinton, his face drained of color. Elaine dropped her pen, her composure splintering as she fumbled through her papers. Bryson sat still, his hands folded in his lap. He didn't smile, didn't gloat. He simply looked at Gregory across the room, his eyes hard, unflinching. For the first time, Gregory looked away. Outside the courthouse, the Texas sun burned hot against the brick steps. Reporters clustered, cameras clicking, microphones stretching forward. "Mr. Keaton, is it true you own the land beneath Georgetown Estates? What does this mean for homeowners inside the gates? Are you planning to charge rent? Evict people?" Bryson raised a hand, his voice even, deliberate. "This isn't about power. It's about truth. The HOA overstepped. They tried to bury me under fines that never applied. Today, the truth came out." He left it there. No more, no less. Behind him, Gregory stood at the courthouse doors, watching, his face a mask of fury barely held together. That night, Bryson sat on his porch, the sky glowing pink with the last trace of sunset. Mick leaned against the railing, sipping a beer, watching his friend in silence. "You just pulled the rug out from under an entire neighborhood," Mick said finally, a grin tugging at the edge of his mouth. Bryson's gaze stayed fixed on the fields, his expression unreadable. "They thought they had me cornered." He let the words hang, then added quieter. "They never knew the ground they were standing on." The cicadas buzzed louder, the night thick with heat and silence. But even in that quiet, Bryson could feel it. The fight wasn't finished. He'd won the day in court, but outside those walls, the neighborhood was already shifting, boiling, breaking. And somewhere in that darkness, someone would decide this wasn't over. Word spread faster than wildfire. By the time Bryson pulled into his driveway that evening, his phone was buzzing nonstop. Missed calls, unread texts, links pouring in. The story had left the courthouse and spilled into the streets. Local stations ran the headline in bold. "HOA fines man $250,000. Turns out he owns their neighborhood." By midnight, it wasn't just Georgetown talking. Dallas picked it up. Austin too. Then Houston. By morning, the internet had carried it farther than Bryson ever imagined. Inside Georgetown Estates, the shock turned to panic. The next HOA meeting was standing room only. People crammed shoulder to shoulder, their voices rising before the gavel even struck. Gregory sat at the front, stiff in his chair, Elaine beside him scribbling on yellow legal pads that never seemed to leave her hands. "This board acted in good faith," Gregory insisted, his voice straining against the noise. "The court hasn't ruled yet. We are confident." "Confident," a voice barked from the back. Victor Landry, a contractor who had lived there 10 years, shot to his feet. His face was red, his finger jabbing toward Gregory. "You find a man into the ground when you had no authority. You dragged this neighborhood into a lawsuit, and you didn't tell us the whole truth. That's not confidence. That's reckless." Applause rippled across the room. Others shouted over one another, demands for Gregory to resign, questions about what Bryson's ownership meant for their mortgages, their property values, their futures. Elaine leaned into her microphone, her tone sharp, clipped, desperate. "Without rules, there is chaos. If Mr. Keaton is allowed to disregard standards, what's to stop the rest of you? This community will collapse." Janice Rowland stood, her voice cutting through the din. "Protecting property values doesn't mean breaking the law, Elaine. If his land was never under your control, then what else have you been hiding from us?" The room erupted again, the sound raw and heated. People turned on one another. Friends who once shared barbecue now squared off in the aisles, their voices sharp with fear. In the corner, Bryson sat quietly, arms folded, eyes steady. He hadn't wanted to come, but Mick insisted. "You need to hear what they say when they're scared," Mick had told him, and now he heard it. Fear had cracked the neighborhood clean in two. That night, the story leapt beyond Texas. CNN ran a segment. Fox News debated it on a panel. TikTok users stitched clips of Bryson leaving the courthouse with captions like, "When the HOA picks the wrong neighbor." By the end of the week, strangers drove through Georgetown Estates just to see it, some slow to take videos. Others parked at the curb, whispering as though they were standing outside a crime scene. Bryson had become a symbol. To some, he was a hero. a man who stood up to bullies and exposed corruption. To others, he was a threat, the land baron who owned the soil beneath their feet. He hadn't asked for any of it, but the spotlight didn't care. Reporters camped outside his property, their cameras glinting in the Texas sun. Neighbors knocked on his door, some begging for reassurance, others demanding answers. One couple arrived late one evening, their children waiting in the car, their faces lined with worry. "Mr. Keaton," the husband said, voice steady but tense, "we bought here for stability. Now all we hear is lawsuits and deeds. Just tell us, are we safe in our homes?" Bryson invited them in, offering seats at his kitchen table. The overhead light hummed softly as he answered, slow and deliberate. "You own your houses. I don't want them. I don't want your money. All I ever wanted was respect. That's it." The wife's shoulders eased, just slightly. For the first time, Bryson saw understanding in someone's eyes. But outside, the gossip was sharper than ever. And Gregory wasn't done. A week later, Bryson found an envelope taped to his mailbox. No letterhead, no official seal, just jagged handwriting, black ink pressed hard into the paper. "Leave before you destroy us all." Bryson crumpled it slowly in his fist, his jaw set. He looked across the fields that stretched into the dark, the cicadas shrieking, the air thick with heat. Somewhere out there, someone wasn't whispering. They were warning. Inside, Mick poured them both a drink, shaking his head. "They're scared. Fear makes people stupid. Fear makes people dangerous," Bryson corrected quietly. Late that night, as the clock ticked past midnight, Bryson stepped onto his porch. The fields lay still, the sky black velvet with only a sliver of moon. He took a breath, letting the night settle in. Then he saw it. Headlights. A black SUV idling at the edge of his gravel drive. No movement, no sound but the low rumble of its engine. Bryson's hand tightened on the porch rail. His heart thudded steady, heavy. The SUV lingered a moment longer. Then, with a spray of gravel, it turned and disappeared into the dark. But the message was clear. The courtroom victory was only round one, and somewhere in the shadows, a new fight was waiting. The first night, Bryson thought the SUV was just testing him. The second night proved it wasn't going away. He had barely drifted to sleep when the dogs erupted, their snarls echoing across the ranch. Bryson jolted upright, the old floorboards creaking under his boots as he moved toward the front door. Out on the gravel drive, the black SUV idled again, headlights pouring white fire across his porch, painting the siding of his home in stark beams. Bryson squinted into the glare. His hand hovered near the rifle by the door, but he didn't reach for it. Not yet. Instead, he stepped outside, his shadow stretching long against the gravel. The SUV didn't move. Its engine rumbled, low and steady, like a predator purring. Then, slowly, it rolled forward, tires crunching. The beams swung upward, blinding him. For a split second, Bryson raised a hand against the light. Then the engine roared, the tire spun, and the SUV peeled off into the night, gravel spitting in its wake. The silence that followed was heavier than noise. Bryson stood there, chest rising and falling, jaw tight. He knew intimidation when he saw it. This wasn't about curiosity. This was message sending. The next morning, Georgetown Estates buzzed like a kicked hornet's nest. Bryson drove into town for feed, and when he stopped at the gas station, he could feel the eyes on him. Two men filling their tanks glanced his way, then muttered in low tones. A woman inside the convenience store shifted away from him in the aisle, clutching her coffee tighter. He ignored it. He'd gotten good at ignoring stares. But it wasn't until later that day, when he returned home, that he realized someone wasn't just watching. They were circling. Parked near the subdivision's clubhouse was the SUV. Same make, same tinted windows. This time it wasn't hiding. It sat gleaming in the Texas sun, polished black against the neat lawns and white stone homes. And standing beside it was a man Bryson had never seen before. Victor Stanton didn't look like a neighbor. He looked like he belonged in a boardroom 30 floors above downtown Austin. Perfectly tailored navy suit, gold cufflinks that flashed when he moved, hair slicked back, not a strand out of place. Even the way he stood, weight balanced, hands folded loosely in front of him, radiated control. He spoke briefly with Gregory, who stood at his side like a schoolboy in the presence of a headmaster. Elaine hovered a step behind, clutching her ever-present notepad. Bryson slowed his truck as he passed. For a moment, Victor's head turned, eyes hidden behind dark glasses. They locked on Bryson, steady, unblinking. It was only a glance, but Bryson felt it like a hand on his throat. Gregory said something, and Victor nodded once, calm, deliberate. The SUV's engine growled to life, and the three of them slid inside. When Bryson looked again in his rearview mirror, the vehicle was gone. That evening, as the sun bled red over the horizon, Bryson sat on his porch, boots up on the rail, staring into the fields. The cicadas screamed louder than usual. A crunch of gravel drew his attention. A figure stood at the gate, her hand resting lightly on the latch. Bryson squinted, then recognized her, Paula Green. Mid-40s, soft features hardened by worry. Her blouse wrinkled as though she hadn't meant to stop here, but couldn't drive past without saying something. Bryson rose, walking down to meet her. "Evening, Paula," he said, his voice low. She glanced over her shoulder before speaking, her tone hushed but urgent. "Bryson, you need to know what's happening inside those meetings." He frowned. "What's that?" "Gregory's not running things anymore." Her eyes flicked again toward the subdivision, toward the tidy white homes glowing in the last light. "It's Victor. Victor Stanton. He calls himself an advisor, but he's more than that. He's been at every closed-door session since the court date. He's pushing them, funding them, telling them how to fight you." Bryson studied her face, the way her voice trembled slightly as she said his name. "Who is he?" She shook her head. "Ex-developer. Real estate ties in half this county. People say he knows zoning boards, finance committees, even folks at the courthouse. But it's more than that. Victor doesn't just push paper. He pushes people. And when he's involved, things get ugly." The cicadas droned. Bryson's jaw tightened. "Why are you telling me this?" Paula's eyes glistened, though she held them steady. "Because I've lived here long enough to know what happens when you cross men like him. And because I'm tired of watching neighbors stay silent while they ruin you." She leaned closer, lowering her voice to almost a whisper. "That SUV you've seen? It's his." Bryson's eyes narrowed. The dots connected in an instant. The late-night headlights, the slow intimidation, the quiet claim of territory. Paula stepped back, her hand gripping the latch again. "Be careful, Bryson. Court might have rattled Gregory. But Victor? Court doesn't scare him. He'll play another game, one where rules don't matter." She slipped back toward her car, leaving Bryson standing at the gate, the field stretching wide and empty behind him. That night, Bryson sat alone at his desk, the lamp casting a dull glow over papers spread like a battlefield map. The fines, the lawsuits, the deed that had turned everything upside down. He picked up one of the anonymous notes, the ink jagged, the words still raw. "Leave before you destroy us all." Now he could almost hear a voice behind it. Not Gregory's, not Elaine's. Something colder. Victor's. Bryson leaned back, staring at the dark window where his reflection stared back at him. For the first time, he felt the weight of something larger pressing down. The HOA had been an opponent. Annoying, arrogant, predictable. Victor Stanton was something else. Bryson whispered into the silence, his voice steady. "All right then, let's see how ugly you want to make it." The first sound was not the dogs. It was the glass. A sharp, choking shatter ripped through the living room at 2:13 a.m., a sound that turned sleep into cold adrenaline in a single breath. Bryson was out of bed before his mind caught up, bare feet hitting wood, heart punching at his ribs. He moved through the dark by memory, couch edge, lamp table, scar on the floor where he dropped a wrench last spring. The air already carried that bitter, dusty smell broken windows give off, like old earth and old air suddenly mixing where they shouldn't. The lamp clicked on. Pebbles of glass glittered across the rug like frost. In the center of the mess, half sunk in the carpet, lay a brick wrapped in paper and twine, like someone had taken the time to package a threat neat enough to pass inspection. He crouched close. It wasn't just paper. It was a Georgetown Estates newsletter, neatly folded, its edges taped tight around the brick like a skin. Across the HOA logo, thick black marker carved 3 words into the glossy page. Court won't save you. He didn't touch it. He let the words sit there, absurd in their perfection, the ink bleeding slightly where glass and condensation had kissed. The dogs finally found their voices late, confused, spooling up into a frenzy near the back door. Bryson crossed the room and killed the porch light. He stood in the shadow looking out, the night wide as a mouth. Half a moon laid a dull line over the gravel drive. No cars, no sound, just the wind pressing through the live oaks. He dialed with steady hands and told the dispatcher what he found. The voice on the other end was patient, tired. "An officer will be out," she said. "The way people say rain will come eventually to a dry place." When the deputy arrived, he was alone. He took photos with a phone that buzzed twice in his pocket while he worked. He bagged the brick with a sigh, used words that lived in the space between sympathy and formality. Understandable concern, unusual, we'll note it. He asked if Bryson had enemies, if he'd recently been in any disputes, if he had cameras. At the mention of disputes, his eyes flicked, just briefly, toward the HOA newsletter lying face down in a plastic sleeve. "You gonna canvass?" Bryson asked. The deputy looked at the empty road. "We'll check the area," he said carefully. "Night like this, sound carries. If somebody saw something, they'll call." They would not call. Not here. Not now. Not after the news vans and the arguments and the whispering war eating the neighborhood from the center. After the cruiser pulled away, Bryson stood in the quiet and pressed his palm against the window frame. A splinter pressed into his skin. He didn't pull it out. He welcomed the sting. It made the moment feel honest. He boarded the window before dawn, wood screeching against wood, screws biting in with the stubbornness he respected. At sunrise, the ranch looked ordinary again. Just another morning, just another piece of plywood catching light. He left the board raw, let it show. He found the gate before lunch. It was the old side gate, the narrow one that opened to the service road skirting the back of his acres. The lock wasn't smashed or pried. It was snipped clean, a tidy cut like a surgeon had done it. The chain hung loose, ends fretting in the breeze like a wind chime with no song. 4 boot prints set deep in the dust, 2 coming in, 2 going out. Somebody had been deliberate. Somebody had been patient. He crouched and measured the prints with his fingers, feeling for tread patterns, a habit left over from a childhood of tracking nothing and learning everything. Wide treads, work boots, not fancy, the kind you buy at a feed store if you want your feet to look like they belong. He looked up at the scrub beyond the fence, eyes traveling the line where mesquite meets sky. A piece of twine hung from the far post, frayed, the same dull tan as the twine that had held the newsletter to the brick. He called Mick. "You hurt?" Mick asked, voice rough with sleep and anger. "No." Window, boarded. Gate, cut. A rasp of breath on the line. "I'm coming." By the time Mick's truck rattled into the yard, sun chalked the world pale. Mick took one look at the chain, cut ends glinting like teeth, and spat into the dust. "This ain't prank work," he said. "They did it quiet and left it quiet. Somebody doesn't want you penned. They want you open." "Open to what?" Mick kicked the chain lightly with his boot. It spun, then settled. Whatever comes next. They replaced the lock with one that weighed like a confession. Bryson wrapped the chain too tight, and then tighter. Not because it would stop anyone, but because his hands needed to do something that felt like refusal. On the way back to the house, a black SUV slowed at the edge of the road. Not the same exact one. This one had a small scrape near the rear panel, a different county tag, but it wore the same posture. The driver's window was down. A man's hand rested lightly on the glass. The vehicle didn't stop. It just let the moment happen, like a photographer deciding if the light was good. Then it slid on. Mick watched it go, jaw grinding. "You seeing this?" "I'm seeing it." "You calling?" "I called last night." And today, Bryson looked at the road-soaked sunlight, at his own fence line shining like a dare. "Today I take pictures," he said. "Today I remember." By afternoon, neighbors had a new gospel to whisper. Bryson's living room window boarded. Bryson's side gate cut. Bryson's truck, parked with its nose toward the road like a dog that's learned to watch the door. Some looked at him with pity in their eyes, the kind you reserve for people who don't know they lost already. Others looked at him like he'd finally gotten what he deserved. A few, just a few, looked at him like they wanted to apologize, but their mouths couldn't remember how. Bryson saw them all. He forgave none of them just yet. He drove to the hardware store at dusk and bought 2 motion cameras, a spool of wire, and a box of screws heavy enough to build a new life. The cashier stared too long at the plywood dust on his shirt, but didn't ask questions. On the way out, a man by the display grill said too loudly to no one, "Funny how folks who want to be left alone always end up on the news." Bryson didn't look back. He mounted one camera over the driveway and another near the service gate, fingers steady on the drill. He wired them to a battery pack and a cloud account he'd never wanted to have. When the last screw bit home, the sky had gone the color of old bruises. The cameras winked red like closed eyes learning to wake up. The dogs lifted their heads to watch, then dropped them again as if to say we'll bark when it matters. Bryson believed them. Paula called at 10. Her voice was thin, a line stretched too tight. "You up?" "Yeah. I need you to come by." The street lamp outside her house bathed the driveway in a soup of sodium yellow. The lines on the pavement looked soft, like someone had taken a wet finger to fresh paint. Her car sat low on one side. The rear tire collapsed into itself, rubber peeled back like a mouth pulled too wide. Not a nail, not a slow leak. A slice, clean and long, ending in a tidy curve like a signature. She stood on the porch with her arms folded tight. Her eyes had that glassy look people get when they're holding back something bigger than tears. "They did both," she said, "front and back. I didn't notice the front until I tried to back out." "They..." She gave a sound that wasn't a laugh. "Who else writes me notes about loyalty like they're sending wedding invitations?" Bryson bent low and palmed the cut, feeling the smooth edge. He smelled the oil, the lingering heat from rubber pressed to pavement all day. He pressed the pad of his thumb against the groove and felt the soft give of the tire around it, the way damage keeps breathing after it starts. "Any cameras?" he asked, looking up. She shook her head. "I'm not you. You will be by midnight." He straightened. "I've got a spare set. We'll mount one front, one back. Motion activated. Night vision." "Night vision," she repeated softly, like the phrase belonged in a different life. "I teach 3rd graders how to hold scissors safely, Bryson. I don't live like this." "You do now," he said, and hated himself for being right. They worked in a silence that wasn't empty. Paula held the ladder while he drilled into the soffit, each vibration shivering through wood and bone. He set the angle tight on the driveway, the lens staring hard at where the rubber had failed. He ran wire along the trim, clean as a surgeon's stitch. When he finished, he turned the screen toward her, and the drive bloomed in greens and grays, alive where the eye saw only dark. She exhaled shaky. "God," she said, "it's ugly." "It's honest," he said. When he climbed down, she touched his arm. Her fingers were cold. "They told me to stop," she said. "Not just the board. Someone else." Her eyes moved past him to the road, to the part of the night that doesn't blink. "They said accidents happen to loud people." The words found a place inside him that wanted to rage and locked it in a room with the light off. Rage is heat. Heat makes mistakes. He needed cold. "You can pull your testimony," he said, though the words tasted like blood. She stepped back like he'd slapped her. "Don't you dare," she said, voice low. "Don't you talk to me like I didn't watch you get tore apart in that meeting and keep your hands at your sides. I'm scared. I am. But I'm not done." He nodded once. "All right." Paula's porch light hummed. In the corner of the frame, a moth banged itself stupid against glass. "You know what bothers me most?" she said, quieter now. "It's how polite it all is. The car is idle. The notes use full sentences. The men who scare you look like they smell expensive. It's the neatness that makes it evil. You saw him? Bryson asked, already knowing which him she meant. I saw the SUV, she said. I saw a man with cufflinks wave through a window like the Queen. He didn't look at me. He looked through me. Victor. She nodded once. Gregory is a pamphlet. Victor is the policy. They stood together a minute and watched the screen. The driveway held its breath. Somewhere out on the road, a car rolled by slow, then faster, then gone. Bring a bag, Bryson said finally. For what? You're not sleeping here tonight. Bryson, you're not. He didn't raise his voice. He changed the air around the words until they sounded like plans instead of opinions. You can take the guest room. The cameras will roll. Let whoever wants to watch an empty porch watch it. She looked at the screen one more time and nodded. Let me grab my lesson plans. Bryson waited in the doorway and tried not to count the minutes. He thought about the board, about the newsletters, about the tidy holes cut into rubber and chain. He thought about men whose hands stayed clean because they had other men to stain them. An engine hummed at the end of the block. He stepped outside without thinking, body already moving to that place between cover and sight line. A black SUV coasted to the corner and paused. No lights this time. It didn't need them up close. The street lamp made skin out of shadow. The vehicle idled, angle perfect to see the driveway and the door. He lifted his phone. The screen painted his face pale. He didn't press record. He let the lens drink. The SUV held a beat, 2, 3. Then it rolled on, weightless as a lie. Paula's screen pinged. Motion detected. The drive bloomed in jerky frames. The car slow glide. The same polite pause. The same getting small at the corner. She stared at the video and then at the window, like she had to decide which version was real. It's both, Bryson said. She tucked her lesson plans into a bag that suddenly looked like luggage. Okay, she said. Let's go. They locked the door twice and then again. He carried her bag. She carried the fear like it had handles. Back at Bryson's place, the board on the living room window looked less like a patch and more like a forecast. He put her in the guest room with a glass of water and a promise that he would sit a while before sleeping. She put the glass down without drinking and said good night like the word had edges. Mick called at midnight. You up? Yeah. Paula? Safe. Good, Mick said. Listen, I drove by the clubhouse. Lights were on late. Not a meeting night. Victor. Couldn't see. But I saw 3 men leave together. One had that walk you get when a belt costs more than my truck. Stay off it tonight, Bryson said. Mick laughed without humor. You don't have to tell me twice. After the line went dead, Bryson sat on the floor with his back against the couch. The dogs nested at his knees the way old friends do. A weight that says keep breathing. He watched the feed from Paula's porch and his own gate. The screens made tiny prisons of the dark. Nothing moved for a long time. At 1:47 a.m., a moth hit Paula's camera and turned itself into a dying star. At 2:03, a coyote's eyes flashed near Bryson's fence and vanished. At 2:19, the wind found the cut chain on the old lock he'd left as a warning to himself and set it tapping lightly against the post. Tap, tap, tap. A metronome set to we can come back any time. He closed his eyes. He saw the brick again. He saw the newsletter's glossy surface, torn into a truth ugly enough to feel righteous. He saw Victor's cufflinks catch light like small commandments. Tap, tap, tap. He opened his eyes and said out loud to nobody and everybody, okay. It was not surrender. It was the sound a man makes before he decides what kind of fight it is. Outside, the chain kept time. Inside, the house held its breath. On a street a mile away, a black SUV idled long enough for a night shift nurse to glance at her watch and then forget it by morning. Morning would bring questions. So would the next night. But for now, Bryson counted the taps and let the numbers make a prayer that wasn't polite. He slept in a chair with his boots on. The courthouse didn't feel like justice that morning. It felt like theater. The Williamson County building stood heavy in the heat, its stone face pale under the August sun. Inside, the air conditioners wheezed, but the hallways still carried the smell of sweat, paper, and nerves. Bryson had been here before, but this wasn't the same fight. The last time, Gregory and Elaine had walked in puffed up with indignation. This time, they didn't enter first. The SUV pulled up to the curb, black paint gleaming, chrome edges polished like mirrors. The door opened, and Victor Stanton stepped out. The world seemed to tilt for a moment. He wasn't loud. He wasn't fast. He didn't have to be. His presence carried like a sermon, calm, precise, expensive. A dark suit that looked like it had been tailored that morning. A tie the color of wet asphalt. Gold cufflinks flashing with every controlled movement. Gregory followed 2 steps behind him, head slightly bowed, like a man who had finally remembered he was just a pawn. Elaine trailed them, clutching her folder so tightly her knuckles whitened. Victor didn't look around. He didn't need to. He moved with the certainty of someone who already believed the outcome belonged to him. Bryson sat at the defense table, his lawyer Renee flipping calmly through her notes. She didn't look up when Victor entered, but Bryson did. Their eyes met for the first time, and in that silence, Bryson felt the temperature in the room drop. Victor's mouth curved in something too faint to be called a smile. Then he turned away, sliding into the front row like he'd purchased a seat. The judge entered, called the case. Emergency hearing, the clerk announced. Georgetown Estates Homeowners Association versus Mr. Bryson Keaton, petition to enforce community easement authority. Clinton Avery, the HOA's attorney, rose sharply. His voice was clipped, but the confidence from last time had sharpened into urgency. Your Honor, this case concerns community order. My clients cannot maintain standards if adjacent properties operate outside of them. To protect safety, security, and property values, the board requests immediate authority over all easements connected to Georgetown Estates, including those running through Mr. Keaton's land. It sounded rehearsed, like something Victor himself had drafted. Bryson glanced at Gregory. The man looked smaller now, a mouthpiece holding borrowed words. Renee rose slowly, smoothing her jacket. She didn't posture. She simply walked to the podium and laid down a thin folder. Your Honor, this is not about safety. It is not about easements. It is about power, and who actually has it. The HOA claims jurisdiction it does not have, and we will show not only that my client owns his land free of their control, but that the board has knowingly pursued him, despite clear evidence to the contrary. Her voice was even. Her words carried. For a moment, the room tilted again. The first testimony was Elaine's. Her hand shook slightly as she read from a paper about community uniformity and aesthetic standards. Her voice sounded thinner than usual, almost brittle. Then it was Paula. Bryson's chest tightened as she rose from her seat, every step deliberate. She wore no jewelry, just a plain navy blouse and dark slacks. Her eyes darted briefly toward the gallery, and Bryson noticed Victor watching her, expression unreadable, fingers folded neatly together on his knee. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore, and sat. Ms. Green, Renee began. You've lived in Georgetown Estates how long? 17 years. Paula answered, steady. In those 17 years, how many times have you witnessed the board find someone outside the community gates? Paula inhaled. Never. Not until Bryson. Renee nodded. And why did you decide to come forward today? Paula's hands tightened on the armrests, but her voice didn't waver. Because I've seen the emails. I've seen the way the board talks when they think no one else will read it. A ripple shot through the courtroom. Gregory's head jerked toward her. Elaine's lips parted like she'd been slapped. Renee held up a printout. Ms. Green, do you recognize this? Paula leaned forward, scanning. Yes. Can you read the highlighted portion for the court? Paula's voice carried, clear as glass. Keaton's land isn't under our jurisdiction, but if we let him slide, others will notice. He needs to be made an example. The gallery gasped. Even the judge leaned forward. Gregory's face flushed red, his jaw working but no words coming. Elaine gripped her chair, scribbling uselessly. Victor. He didn't move. He simply tilted his head, as if watching a play unfold exactly as scripted. Renee let the silence do its work, then placed another document on the podium. Your Honor, these are county survey maps, filed and certified. They show an easement corridor running through Mr. Keaton's property. This corridor is the only direct link between the subdivision and the county highway. Without access to it, Georgetown Estates is effectively boxed in. She clicked a remote. On the projection screen, the map bloomed, black lines, property boundaries, roads marked with neat labels. The corridor stood out in bold red, slicing clean across Bryson's acres. The room stirred. People leaned forward, whispering. The realization dawned like lightning. They need me, Bryson thought, the words burning behind his teeth. Renee's voice sharpened, cutting through the murmurs. This is why the board has pursued my client. Not because of porch lights, not because of sheds, but because his land controls the one artery their property values depend on. They knew this, and instead of negotiating fairly, they chose intimidation, fines, and now this lawsuit. The judge's face hardened. Mr. Avery, he said, turning to the HOA's lawyer, were you aware of this easement dependency? Clinton faltered. His eyes flicked toward Victor. For the first time, Victor moved, crossing one leg over the other, his cufflinks catching light as he leaned back in his chair. He didn't nod. He didn't shake his head. He simply watched serene as Clinton stammered. Your Honor, easements are complex. We acted in good faith. The judge's gavel cracked once. Enough. I will review the full record, but the evidence presented raises serious questions about the plaintiff's claims. This court is adjourned until further notice. The gallery erupted. Residents buzzed in frantic whispers. Some stared at Bryson with wide eyes, like they'd just seen a card trick that rewrote reality. Others looked at Gregory with fury, voices hissing sharp questions. Bryson sat still, muscles tight under his shirt. He didn't celebrate. He didn't grin. He only glanced sideways at Victor Stanton. For the first time, Victor looked back, and this time he smiled. Slow, thin, a smile that wasn't defeat. It was a promise. The night after court felt heavier than victory. Bryson sat on his porch with the gavel's echo still in his ears, but it didn't sound like justice. It sounded like warning. The dogs picked up on it too. They didn't sprawl easy the way they usually did. They hovered near the steps, ears twitching, throats humming low growls at shadows only they could see. By morning, Bryson found out why. The irrigation line was split clean through. He saw it from 50 yards away, a silver arc of water spraying into the air, catching dawn light like shattered glass. As he ran closer, his boots slapping wet dirt, the damage unfolded in front of him. The main pipe had been sliced lengthwise, the edges too neat to be accident, too deliberate to be weather. The soil drank the water fast, turning the earth into dark slop. Rows of young crops sagged in their beds, drowning at the root. What should have been green promise was curling into death. Bryson knelt in the mud, running his fingers along the cut. A sharp blade, straight hand. Somebody came here in the night with purpose. Behind him, Glenn's truck rattled to a stop. The older man climbed out, his hat low, his mouth pressed into a grim line. Jesus, Glenn muttered, crouching beside the split. That's sabotage. Bryson wiped mud on his jeans, jaw tight. Victor. Glenn studied the spray, shook his head. This ain't HOA business no more. This is muscle. This is him saying, I can reach inside your life anytime I want. Bryson stood, the spray wetting his shirt like rain. His voice was flat. Then let him hear me say it back. I'm still standing. But the truth pressed like the mud in his boots. Every slice in the pipe cost him money, time, and control. Victor wasn't just cutting water. He was bleeding him slow. 2 days later, Paula showed up pale and trembling. She dropped into the chair at Bryson's table, her hands wrapped around a coffee mug like it was an anchor. She didn't touch the drink. She just held it. They called me, she said finally, voice hollow. Bryson's brow furrowed. Who? She lifted her eyes, wide and wet. A voice I didn't know. Said if I cared about my job, I'd retract everything I said in court. Said the school board wouldn't want a teacher who makes trouble. Bryson leaned forward, fists tightening against the wood grain. "They threatened your work." Paula nodded, tears finally breaking. It wasn't even a shout, just calm, like they were reading the weather report. And then they hung up. Bryson's jaw clenched so hard it hurt. He reached across the table, placing a rough hand over hers. "Listen to me. You did the right thing. That's what they hate most. Don't let them break you." But her shoulders curled inward. "I don't know how long I can take this, Bryson. My tires, my job, my name whispered in the grocery line. Her voice cracked. It's everywhere." Bryson wanted to tell her it would stop, that Victor would grow bored and slither back into whatever city tower he'd come from. But lies taste worse than fear. Instead he said, "If they're watching you, then they're scared of you. That means you've already hurt them." It was a truth that sounded like comfort, but Paula didn't lift her eyes. Victor escalated the way men like him always did, not through courts, but through silence made loud. That evening, Bryson noticed the SUV parked farther down his road, half hidden behind the mesquite. No lights, no movement, just waiting. He thought about ignoring it. Then he thought about the split irrigation line, about Paula's trembling hands. He grabbed his truck keys. The diesel engine growled to life, the headlights cutting clean across the fields. The SUV shifted like it had been woken. It pulled out slow, then quick, its black shell glinting as it turned down the county road. Bryson followed. The chase lasted 10 minutes, 10 minutes of gravel spit, tires grinding, engines humming in the night. The SUV never ran, never gunned. It just kept distance, a ribbon of taillights teasing him into the dark. Then, without warning, it veered left down a dirt track and vanished behind a ridge. Bryson swung his truck wide, headlights flooding empty scrub. Tire tracks cut deep into the dirt, curving toward the subdivision line. And when he followed them to the end, his stomach twisted. They stopped near Paula's property. The SUV had idled there, waiting, close enough to see her windows glow. Then it had backed away, neat and deliberate, like leaving a signature. Bryson killed the engine and sat in the silence, the crickets screaming louder than any threat. Victor wasn't circling anymore. He was pointing. The real break came a week later. It was just past midnight when Bryson woke to the dogs again. Only this time it wasn't barking. It was panic, a shrill, desperate cry that dragged him out of bed like a hook. He burst onto the porch, flashlight in hand, and what he saw dropped his stomach into stone. The SUV had crashed straight through his cattle fence. Wood splintered, rails scattered. The headlights flooded the pasture, blinding the herd. Cattle bawled in confusion, some scattering toward the creek, others pressing against each other in fear. Bryson sprinted into the chaos, boots pounding dirt. His flashlight beam wavered across the black shell of the SUV, its engine idling low, the grille smeared with dust and wood fragments. 50 yards away, it stopped. Just stopped. Bryson froze, chest heaving, the flashlight trembling in his hand. The driver's window rolled down. For a moment, all he saw was darkness inside. Then, slowly, a red dot bloomed across his chest. A laser sight, steady as a heartbeat. The dot held unshaking. His breath thundered in his ears. Then the SUV's engine roared, tires spinning, headlights slashing wide. It peeled away, plowing over the broken fence and vanishing into the night, leaving Bryson standing alone in the dirt, cattle scattering around him, his heart racing against the memory of that red light. He lowered the flashlight, his hand trembling. His voice cracked as he whispered into the emptiness. "This isn't HOA anymore." And for the first time, he wondered not if Victor wanted him gone, but how far Victor was willing to go to make it happen. To be continued in Part 2, where Bryson investigates Victor's shell companies, Paula faces career blackmail, and a shocking disappearance ties it all together.